Joining me now is General Carl Mundy, former Commandant of the United States Marine Corps, 30th Commandant of the Marine Corps. And as the Commandant, he was a member of the Joint Chiefs. He oversaw the operational forces of the Marine Corps, responsible for some 240,000 uniformed men and women who served our nation both on active duty and reserve in the Marine Corps. General Mundy, thank you for being here.
Good to be here with you, Tony.
And thank you for your service as our Commandant.
No need to thank me. It was my privilege.
Commandant, you wrote a letter that was circulated to members of the Senate on the Hill just this week, expressing grave concern about this change in policy, especially being rushed through during a lame duck session of Congress. But you made one point in that letter which I think most Americans don't understand. When someone enlists or becomes an officer in the military, they give up certain rights, and one of those is to defend their way of life as a member of the military, politically speaking.
Well, that's true, Tony. The military is a special segment of society. Those are words out of Congress, not mine. It's less than 1% of the population of this nation who serve in uniform. They come voluntarily. The draft went out 38 years ago. Nobody has to serve. So it's voluntary, and when you do commit to serve, you do so unlike many places in the ordinary society. You sign a contract, you give an oath sworn before God that you will support and defend the Constitution and the laws and the rules and regulations that define this unique segment of society. You are, in fact, I like to use the analogy, after you take that oath and sign and come in, you are an individual who operates with one hand tied behind his or her back in terms of your political ability to speak out or to represent your own views, and the other one in a respectful salute of obedience to the nation.
So in this scenario, this is why you hear mostly from retired military leaders and others, is because they're the only ones who can really speak to this issue. Those that are currently serving do not have the ability to speak.
Absolutely, you don't. I mean, the service chiefs can give their views when Congress asks them to do that. But those that are in uniform, again, don't have the right to go out and demonstrate on the mall or to be active in political matters. They are expected to be obedient and serve.
So that's why it's important that when we understand over nearly 1,100 retired flag and general officers have signed on to a letter that Elaine Donnelly helped circulate and you helped put together that made very clear to the President not to overturn this policy. Now, let me ask you some specific questions, because we're often told that, well, look, we're losing a lot of qualified individuals because of the don't ask, don't tell policy, which was a compromise policy that Congress adopted because President Clinton back in the 90s wanted open homosexuality, and Congress said, no, it's illegal, but here's a policy. We won't ask, you don't tell, you can serve. The numbers of men and women who are being discharged because of this policy are minuscule, and in terms of what we may lose if the policy is changed.
Tony, that's great hyperbole, the fixation on numbers. I think the argument would be that something like 14,000 have been kicked out because of who they are. That's just not true. Let me give you an example. In my own service, the Marine Corps, last year, we discharged something over 32,400 Marines, men and women who had, for the most part, served honorably, and it was time for them to come back to civilian life and do a lot for America as former Marines. Of that number that was discharged, 32,400, 78, less than 1/4%, were discharged for reasons that would be associated with don't ask, don't tell, as we euphemistically refer to it. Of that 78, more than half were still in entry-level training. These are young people, 17, 18, 19, maybe 20 years old, who are not even yet qualified in the military, much less skilled. Mm-hmm. So those are the type losses, and I suspect from my own experience and that of many others that who know that when you get into the fiery forge that is Marine Corps boot camp, oftentimes you say anything to get off Paris Island or to get out of San Diego. So that's a very young population. Again, these are not 30-somethings that are going into law offices uptown or operating around out of the New York on the streets or something. These are young, just post-teenage men and women who come in to serve their country and and require a lot of grooming to do that.
I remember those days.
Yeah, they were great days.
The point is that a lot of these, in fact, I spoke to another former commandant who said that given the stress that's on the military today, that there are some among those numbers, those small numbers that are getting discharged under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Some of it is to avoid another tour of potential duty in Iraq or Afghanistan, and it's a no questions asked way out. So these numbers are even the small numbers are not truly reflective of what's happening in terms of the impact of this law.
Well, I don't have any insights into that last suggestion. I wouldn't doubt it, but by the same token, the point that you make is so valid, and it's one that is not out there in the public forum, and that is that this is really a very small issue, and we are yet focusing the whole nation on it. The troops, to use that term collectively, are fixated on it. There may be some that advocate it, but there are a lot more that have indicated that they have reservations about it.
What's your greatest concern about the changing of this policy in this narrow window of time, in this lame duck session of Congress, at a time when our nation is engaged in two conflicts?
Impact on the effectiveness of the armed forces. The armed forces are not created to be a social reform institution. They're created to fight this nation's wars. And anything that detracts from that, and I believe that this would, anything that detracts from that runs a risk of making our forces less effective. You know, we have yet to hear the question asked, what would repeal do to increase the effectiveness of the armed forces? That's never a question that's been addressed.
Well, in fact, the focus, in fact, the Secretary of Defense even acknowledged that in the Secretary, not only the Secretary of Defense, but the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs acknowledged that there would be some negative impact by this, especially as it was expressed from the combat forces, those in the Marine Corps and the Army in particular. So I think you put it in a different context, which is the question that I think you have put to the Senate that they should be asking. How does this help our military better accomplish its mission?
The measure of effectiveness of a military organization is success in combat, and I used to term it, and I've heard others term it, bring them back alive. You know, when you don't succeed in a military organization, you leave bodies on the battlefield. It is very important that it be tight, that it be cohesive, that everyone that's in that organization believe that, look, I've got your six, or he's got my six. You have to have that type of confidence and you know, and fidelity, faithfulness to each other.
General Mundy, one last question. I, again, appreciate you joining us for this webcast. What would you say to the average American who is out there who's not served in the military, doesn't have a family member in the military, feels like maybe they don't have a stake in this? What would you encourage them to first think about this issue, and secondly, what would you suggest they do?
Well, you know, my suggestion is that we stand firm on the law. There's great confusion on that. Don't ask, don't tell is not the law. It is a policy, as you pointed out to begin with. It has been carefully spun to be intertwined with the law. The law is very clear, and the 11 findings that support the law after 18 hearings by the Congress 17 years ago when this was created are enormously convincing. If you read those, you can't walk away without an understanding that this is a law worth supporting because of the reason for which it was created, that is, effectiveness of that less than 1% of those who volunteer to go out and defend the rest of us who are back here wearing blue suits and blue shirts here today.
It's an issue of national security.
To me, it's an issue of national security.
Well, General, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate so much you coming by, and again, thank you for your leadership on this issue, very important issue for the future of our nation.
Thank you for yours, Tony.
Semper Fi.
Nice to be with you.